now. So, hello everybody, and welcome to this lecture about participatory action research. My name is Stephen Gray. I'm the director of a non-government organization called Adapt Peacebuilding. I'm also a doctoral researcher at the Institute of Development Studies at the University of Sussex. This is an institute that specializes in participatory research methodologies and international development, and some of the methodologies and academic references that I will show you today come from that institute. And so it's my real pleasure to talk about participatory action research. I hope this is an approach to research that you can be interested about and consider applying in your own research projects. I'm going to talk a lot about experience of using this approach to research in Myanmar, and I really believe that it is an approach that's different to other ways of doing research insofar as it offers a lot of potential to actually take action in relation to the type of problems and challenges that you're looking at, and to involve a lot of people from inside the country in the local context, to involve them in being researchers and taking their own action to try and address these challenges. So a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. We want to know what is this approach to research, participatory action research, and how it's different than other ways of doing research. You're all experienced academics, and sometimes that experience is helpful for us in doing PAR, but sometimes we almost need to unlearn or find an alternative way of thinking about research when we do PAR, because it's quite different in a number of ways. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the different stages of the research process, because it's not just the learning part, the knowledge creation part, but also the application of that, taking action. And we'll think about, from a research design perspective, what you might need to think about if you were going to try to incorporate this approach yourself. So a little bit about me. I've been working on Myanmar since 2008, so about 15 years now. I lived inside the country between 2011 and 2017. And that time I worked in a variety of different roles, sometimes as a researcher doing applied qualitative research on issues related to peace and conflict, mostly. I also worked as a political advisor for some political parties or EROs, non-state armed groups. I worked with civil society, I worked with NGOs, and I worked a lot in developing participatory research projects since 2013, I think, or quite recently. So I'll be trying to use some of that experience of working with various people to inform what we talk about today. And so first of all, what is participatory action research? Well, hopefully you've had a chance to look at the reading from Cornish et al. That I sent through. It's a very good reading. I recommend it. It really gives a good history and background and of the approach to doing research, as well as the various building blocks or points that you need to consider. And the way that they describe it is an approach to research that prioritizes experiential knowledge for tackling problems caused by unequal and harmful social systems, and for envisioning and implementing alternatives. So there are a few important clues in there as to what this research approach is all about and how it's different. Firstly, it is an approach to research. It's participatory action research is like it's not one single methodology. There are various methodologies that go under this umbrella, but it is a way of doing research. it's not a topic. You can explore sociology, politics, history, a range of social science topics using this methodology. One feature of it is that it values experiential knowledge. So I believe Sayang Chor talked in his lecture about different types of knowledge. Well, this very much values a direct experience, empirical knowledge, which is the knowledge of the people themselves that are undertaking the research in their places and based upon their experience and the experience of the people that they are talking to. Another feature of PAR that you can see here is it's for tackling problems caused by unequal and harmful social systems. So it is an applied form of research. It is trying to actually not just produce knowledge for knowledge's sake, but produce knowledge to take action and to take action with a goal in mind. So this goes further than a lot of other types of research in that it's actually not just trying to understand problems, but it's trying to do something about them. And when we talk about unequal and harmful social systems, we're bringing in this idea of power, of unequal power relations. So there's something about this approach to research which is trying to challenge the established order or trying to challenge aspects of the established order that are harmful to people, and to do it by trying to design and implement some solutions. So these are all aspects that we're going to dig into a lot more. As for where this approach to research came from, it arose out of anti-colonial movements in the 1970s and 1980s. Now, these movements of scholars, activists, community members, civil society organizations were trying to regain territorial and economic control for people that had been dominated under colonialism. But they were also pushing back against that epistemological or epistemic injustice of a Western approach to trying to research and understand the situations of dominated peoples. So top-down research methods, objective scientific methods of trying to understand the situation of people in these places. And this reaction to that was to say, well, what about the lived experience and agency of people that are actually in those places, experiencing those challenges, bringing Indigenous knowledge and bringing their own agency, relationships, understandings, and action, and to trying to frame challenges and to trying to devise situations for themselves. So in many ways, this is a reaction to domination and oppression with separate strands or types or genealogies of participatory action research that emerged in Latin America and various Asian contexts, African contexts, and in the European and American traditions. So this is an approach to doing research which stands in contrast to conventional Western paradigm of knowledge creation. And I'm not going to try to summarize or present all of the methodologies, but just a few here that might be of interest. One is participatory rural appraisal, and this came from somebody called Robert Chambers, who you'll see referenced in various places in this lecture. Robert Chambers is somebody that has been very influential in the development of PAR approaches, particularly in the field of development studies or international development. And he has been influential on my PhD supervisor, who's Danny Burns, who was the progenitor of the second methodology here for systemic action research, which we've been using in Myanmar in 2013, and I'll present some examples of that here. And then a third example is, of course, from Ajahn Chayang, which is Thai Ban methodology. And you'll see that these ways or distinct methodologies share some common principles that are stand in contrast to other forms of research. So the first point when we try to break down and understand this methodology in more detail is to ask, what is the participatory part of participatory action research? What does that refer to? And in a simpler sense, it's to say that participatory research, and there are many kinds of participatory research, not just participatory action research, but in general, participatory research is that which is carried out with and by local people, rather than research that is about them. And there's just a couple of images here which compare different research approaches. So on the left, this is an example of myself conducting conflict assessment, so a form of applied research in which I'm doing key informant interviews with people that might be considered experts about conflict, which are typically people in some kind of leadership position with some kind of expertise in a conventional sense. On the right-hand side is an example of conducting systemic action research, which is a form of participatory action research that we'll learn more about later, in which the people that are collecting data in this example are actually from the place. This is in Liza, in Kitchen State. They're actually from the place where the challenges that they're researching are. And they're interviewing people that are, in many ways, their peers. They're other people from civil society organizations, other community members from the same place. And so the second form on the right is a much more participatory form of research, in that the people that are collecting the data, that are then analyzing the data, and then going to use the findings to take action and change their social systems, are all from the place where these challenges are. It's not some outsider who is involved in collecting data, making sense of that data, making recommendations based upon that data to other organizations outside of that context. So one is a more conventional, expert, more Western research paradigm. One is a more participatory research paradigm. So to understand this from your own experience, what I'd like you to do, because you're all experienced academics and researchers yourself, is think of an example of research in your life. Could be in your recent history, could be further in the past. And if you want to stop the recording for a moment to do that, feel free to. Now, when you've thought of this example, I'd like you to ask the question of who, and who decided that this research was needed, who shaped the research questions and decided what it was actually important to answer, who was able to provide data into this, who did you select to get data from, or who self-selected, who was not able to participate, and how do you know who should be participating? Who made sense of this data? Was it you? Was it done by an individual? Was it done by a group? What was the relationship between those that provided data, those that analyzed it? Who made findings or recommendations from that? Who disseminated those findings and recommendations, the new knowledge that was produced? and who, if anybody, decided what would be acted upon, how much it would be acted upon, the findings and recommendations or further research questions, who was involved in the take-up and application of that research. So think about that. What you're trying to get at is how participatory was the process. And the insight from the perspective of participation is, in the example that you're thinking of, whether you used key informant interviews, or you used surveys, or you used focus group discussions, or you used some other kind of method, it can be more or less participatory, your research approach. It's not to say that your research either is participatory or it isn't, but how much were people from the context that you're investigating involved in providing data, making sense of that data, deciding how it's going to be used? It can be more or less participatory, and methods are only how you actually develop methods, how you design the research is going to influence how participatory it is. If it's very participatory, it has maximum agency, maximum role for the beneficiaries of that research, the people you're collecting data from, the people that are from the place in question. It has maximum roles for them at various stages of the research process. So if you're only involving local people when you collect the data, and you say, oh, we talked to, thousands of local people, it's very participatory. But if they had no role in thinking about which questions were important, or who should actually be spoken to, or had no roles in analyzing the data, had no roles in actually deciding what data or findings would then be used, then it's not necessarily particularly participatory, even if you've spoken to a lot of people. So another feature that participatory refers to is it's really moving towards kind of shared knowledge, collective analysis, which is sometimes distinct from this idea of individual experts that maybe spent whole careers in one field, so trusted to analyze things by themselves. Now, what does the action and participatory action research refer to? And this is possibly even more important than the participatory part in terms of what makes this a distinct approach. Now, a lot of conventional research tries to understand situation, tries to deduce or analyze what makes a political system function, or maybe provide recommendations about how to fix certain problem, or tries to unlock it or understand a history, but less often does it actually take action in relation to what has been identified as a problem or a need. And the action research tradition is very much focused on that. So action research is an approach to generating knowledge by actually doing things. So trying to understand the situation or a problem, trying to devise a plan to do something about that, taking action, which in a way is developing a hypothesis about a change that you want to see, and testing that by taking action, then reflecting upon the results of taking action, making conclusions about that, and then making a new plan again. And typically conventional research does not repeat that cycle. It might understand a problem, it might make a plan about it, but it doesn't involve the action and reflection. That might only happen in the next project that you do. Whereas in action research, you typically have multiple cycles that are doing this again and again and again over a period of 1 year, 2 years, 5 years or more. So this is an iterative process that involves many people in trying to refine your understanding, improve it, and actually learn by the actions that you take to address the problems that you've identified. One other feature that you will hear or read about a lot in the literature is the relationship of methodologies or methodological approaches like participatory action research to addressing social problems that are particularly complex, dynamic, or systemic. So some problems are, let's say, complicated, but not complex. And by that, I mean that we can understand the constituent parts of that problem. They're relatively mechanical and easy to see. And what we might try to do with that problem is improve the efficiency of how we're addressing it. So if you look at something like the provision of mosquito nets to try to reduce malaria, you can kind of understand what is the causal pathways involved in that problem. What are the mosquitoes doing to infect people? Who has access to preventative measures like mosquito nets and who doesn't? And how are we going to distribute those efficiently so that we can provide more protection for people? But other types of problems, whether it is homelessness or drug abuse, or lack of economic livelihoods for people that have been displaced by conflict, many other types of problems have so many different factors that contribute to them. And those factors are changing so much that it's very difficult to find a magic bullet, an easy solution to a problem like these. There are so many factors that we can't necessarily even understand, let alone change. So this problem of complexity means that there are limits to our causal understanding of the problems, and they're often changing. So even if we devise a solution that might work well in some places or might work for a period of time, then the situation changes again and the approach is not working anymore. There can also be structural problems around unequal power relations that make it very difficult to actually change the system. This is obviously a feature in Myanmar where there's very unjust power relationships that are blocking the kind of change that we want to see. So in these situations of dynamic complexity, methodologies like participatory action research help in several ways. One is that they bring in a lot of different perspectives of researchers, but also people and organizations that are not traditional researchers. They bring that in to the process of understanding the problem and trying to devise solutions. They also, through this iterative action cycle, it's innovating, it's experimenting with, and it's prototyping potential solutions. The research is often not doing that, right? It's not actually testing different solutions in the context where the problem is. So that's a way of producing innovation. That's a way of improving your response, improving your knowledge in a very opaque challenge. It's also a way of adapting to changes in the context. And in Myanmar, there have been huge changes in the conditions that are experienced by people. So it's valuable to have a research methodology that can adapt. Okay, so we're getting into the time where we've had some background about participatory action research, and that would be useful to see some examples of what the methodology can be and what are the different stages that happen in the process as we go from research, then we go into action, and then we try to understand or scale up our action. So I want to break down and show you some of those stages. And I also want to try to introduce some of the things that you'll need to think about if you were to try to use a methodology like this in your project. It's a methodology that has real advantages with respect to involving a lot of people and actually trying to address some of the challenges that you're facing. But then it has different requirements for you as a researcher, for you as an organizer and facilitator, different support needs, different ways of planning and having to have comfort with uncertainty and having to work with trust and relationships in ways that are sometimes unfamiliar for researchers, or they're a real stretch for our traditional capacities as researchers. So I'm going to try to start introducing those. Now, this example that I'm going to present is of a experience of conducting something called systemic action research in Kachin State between 2013 and 2021 in various parts of Kachin and Pathan, jade mining area, and Liza and Matayang, non-government controlled areas or KIO controlled areas close to the Chinese border, and Putao in the north of Kachin, in Machina, in Bamol, and also in northern Sham, in Gukdai and Lashio. So this work has been conducted with some of our partners, civil society organizations that are still active inside the country. And the first aspect of the work that I want to emphasize is the importance of trust building. This is a participatory action research emphasizes, as we've heard, this participatory aspect, which is the involvement of many people, can be dozens of people, can be hundreds of people, can be thousands of people. And there are a lot of what they are doing is volunteering their time. They're entering into a process with you in which maybe you know each other already, maybe you don't, in which you're not coming with solutions. You're coming with a commitment to work together to try to understand these problems and how they're manifesting locally and try to work on solutions together. And that is not an easy offer to make because people will wonder about what your intentions are sometimes. They might wonder whether you have what resources you're going to provide, the risks that they might have of becoming involved, particularly in the current situation. So this trust building really takes time. And it helps if you already know and then you already have trust. But in our experience, this is a big part of the work, is establishing that trust and then providing sufficient training to begin with the data collection phase. The data collection phase of this work involves speaking with other community members, collecting their life stories, hundreds of them, so you can have data, real data, to understand the problems that you're addressing. So let's take an example. In this example here, there are community researchers. One person is speaking to the people they're interviewing, one person is taking notes, and they're speaking with people that have been displaced by conflict, and they're trying to understand what are the main challenges that created for them in their life. And it's quite an open approach to collecting the data. It's not like a traditional interview, because in a traditional interview, it is the researcher that has decided what is important. But in this approach, it is the respondent, the person that's being interviewed, which chooses what is important to them. And that's a very important distinction, because usually there's a hierarchy in research in which the researcher is an expert and is able to choose what is the most important thing to be discussed, what is the most important problems to be raised and responded to. But in participatory approaches, you're often trying to have the people that you're speaking with maximizing their agency. So in this case, maximizing their potential to talk about what's important to them. So this methodology uses a very open framing to the research so that it can collect life story experiences from their lives about displacement, about conflict, the implications of that, the needs that they might have, the things that they've already tried, what's working and what's not. And that is an approach which needs to be trained in how to actually collect life stories. Now, one of the features of doing participatory action research, given that you're experienced researchers already, is this can be quite different to your normal training. And sometimes you're needing to unlearn, or you're needing to resist your urge to impose your own understanding upon the problem, or to frame the research too much in a way that undermines the agency of the people that you're talking to. And maybe your role would actually not be to do the research yourself, but would be to train others that are from that place, that they do it in this listening kind of way, this more open kind of way. So that's the data collection that we use in this methodology. The next stage, which is a feature that is common to participatory action research, is that there is a collaborative approach to analyzing that data and trying to make sense of it. What are the problems that we're describing by the data? What are the social problems that we are wanting to address? What is most salient or occurs most often in the community? What is the nature of that problem? And in this approach, it uses a kind of systems mapping or causal mapping. So it looks at the events of people's lives and what caused the next thing. What are the causal relationships between them? It identifies the patterns. It's a collaborative analytical process. And they're using hundreds of stories over 5 days to analyze this data. But the interesting feature is that maybe 20 to 30 people are involved in this analysis. These are the same people that collected the data, and sometimes they're the same people that were interviewed as well. So it's participatory in that way, in that many of them are people that have experienced these problems themselves. They're not outside experts trying to understand the situations of others. So they go through this collaborative analysis process, and that might look quite different in other forms of participatory action research. It's not necessarily a systems mapping. It might be some kind of workshop, focus group discussion, some kind of dialogue that is reflecting upon the data that has been gathered and trying to make sense of that, to understand a problem or problems that they want to address. One feature here, which I alluded to already, is the need to challenge expert knowledge, or let's say that the problem that expert knowledge can create, or traditional expert knowledge can create in a participatory process. So we had this experience in the early days in Machina, where one of the people in the group that we were working with was a well-trained researcher, a leading civil society representative in Kachin State. And we were doing this analysis with 30 people from different kinds of backgrounds, different levels of capacities, and it's really important to have that diversity to get a more realistic picture of or different perspectives on these problems. But this well-trained expert was often imposing his understanding on the data. So he was saying, no, really, it's the conflict that causes human rights abuses. And because of the human rights abuses, people can't go outside and they can't work in jobs. And whether or not he was right, having that kind of expert in the room that was imposing a certain view prevented all of the interaction between the other participants that might reveal new information, different details, different explanations of the problems, more complexity, more nuance there that actually enabled for insight, some kind of new understanding about what causes the problem or a new opportunity. So one thing that you need to think about as facilitators of a process like this is being aware of those hierarchies in a room, those power imbalances between those that are able to speak, those that are less culturally likely to be able to speak, like young people or women, people that are less educated and don't feel confident or aren't given the opportunity to share their knowledge, to share their perspective. And you really need to bring that out, because this methodology is all about bringing unheard perspectives into the conversation and enabling a group to benefit from the motivation and the participation of more people. We then, after we've done that kind of analysis, it leads to theories of change. Well, first of all, it leads to an understanding of the problem that you want to address, prioritization of certain problems, potential theories of change. So if we try doing this thing in relation to this, we might see more impact over here because we've mapped the causal connections and we see that there's potential for us to create a change here. So that's what you kind of get. And then you move into the action stage of this. Now, at the action stage of a participatory action research process, it requires capacities for facilitation, which are distinct from a conventional research approach, which need to be trained. And they are sometimes thought of as soft skills that are really important for you to have, or for the people that you're training to do this to have. And these are really about the capacities of people to work well with groups. So being able to listen very well, to be not just respectful of the knowledge of others, but actively trying to draw in the participation from people that don't speak as often, to not be a dictator, to not be the expert standing up and giving your view, but being quite humble and more interested in inviting the views of others, being very comfortable with uncertainty, because all of this data in a group setting often creates confusion before it creates insight. You don't know what the solutions are going to be. You're not turning up there with solutions. You're turning up there with a commitment to work together to understand things. And there's a lot of uncertainty in the group. Where are we going to go? How are we going to do this? How are we going to solve this? You need to trust the process. You need to be a person that holds that process and can lead people or help people to move through that uncertainty. So this requires a lot of self-awareness, openness, and the willingness to be responsible and lead in a way that is not top down. And my challenge to you is to say that in the Myanmar context, we usually have a really strong hierarchy. in which people lead by telling others what to do. And the challenge is to lead by encouraging others to put their own views forward and to cooperate with each other. It's a very democratic way to doing research and requires particular types of people. The other thing that I'd emphasize when you're looking for these facilitators are going to lead action research groups of 6 to 8 people that deal with particular topics. These people should be networkers. The relationship building part is also really important. So what happens next is what I referred to as action research group meetings, in which people are focusing on an issue. Let's say they choose livelihood opportunities for young people. They've got some theories of change, some actions in mind based upon the research that they've done. They're going to implement actions, and they're going to involve communities in implementing these actions to address the problems. They're going to come back, they're going to evaluate what worked and what didn't. They're going to network with more community members, people in positions of power, potentially looking for more resources. Then they're going to do these things again. Wider community meetings is a way to share your research, share your plans that you have made about the actions that you're going to take, attract different perspectives, refine your plans, attract more resources, get approvals from people in positions of power, and build more momentum behind the actions that you're going to take. This is a process of social organizing, social mobilization. At this point, I think it's important to talk about safety and ethics. You will have some digital security training, I think, as part of this, these courses that you're taking. The situation has changed a lot in Myanmar since we were last doing this, and meeting in large groups may be more difficult to do, particularly if you're talking about certain topics. There might be scrutiny or surveillance that wasn't there before. So these considerations you need to take in mind when you're organizing larger events that involve more people, and the people that are involved need to have a sense of any risks that they might be entering into by participating in that research. So you need to be transparent about that and provide people with the opportunity to withdraw their participation at any time. And you need to be very careful around how you collect data, that people are kept anonymous, that their safety is protected. So that goes for the interviewing stage, also things like participant lists for what notes that you might write in meetings, as well as things that you might do online. Just to emphasize the importance of relationship and networking, this is an approach, a process of doing research, which is not just about generating knowledge. I said before, it's about social mobilization. It's also a way of challenging power relations. Compared to conventional research approaches, this is much more bottom up. The knowledge is coming from the lived experience of ordinary people, people that are often disempowered. They're directly affected by the issues that we're talking about, but they're not empowered to do anything about them themselves. So in socially mobilizing in this community-driven way, we're really trying to challenge some of the power relationships. And we do that through the ways that we work with relationships. So that means that when we're having action research groups, we're often also lobbying political leaders, or we're meeting with other organizations that have resources. We're managing tensions that might emerge between different groups in the community. When you're trying to create change, when you're trying to address challenging issues, there will be people and organizations that try to block you. So part of your role as a researcher, which is a stretch for many of us, is to try to manage those tensions, focus on identify the relationships that matter to the change that we're trying to create, and be intentional about working with those relationships to facilitate that kind of change. So I'm just going to look at some of the actions that came out of this process that we're talking about. So one of the actions here, so drug abuse is a big problem in Kachin State, as it has been in various parts of Myanmar historically. And this action was designing drawing competitions in middle schools for kids to learn about the dangers of drug abuse. This next activity, again, these are designed by the action research groups and implemented by the action research groups together with a wide range of community members. This activity was providing mine risk education for 8,000 people around Liza. It was the first time that the risk of landmines, unexploded ordnance, it was the first time that people had ever been educated about those risks. This activity was a track 2 dialogue, or a youth dialogue whereby Kachin youth could have meetings with KIO representatives about the peace process at that time. This activity was in Pakant, and this was the first time that International Human Rights Day had been observed in Pakant. I think it was 2019. And that one thing they did, their creative work was a lot of people work in jade mines in Pakant, as you know, and they gave out these helmets that people could wear with stickers on the helmet that were promoting the recognition of human rights for laborers in the Pakant area. So as we get towards the close of this lecture, there's just a few points that I want to emphasize if you were thinking about using an approach like participatory action research in the projects that you're going to be doing. I've mentioned some of these already. So thinking about as you enter into that process of doing research, who are the stakeholders that you would need to involve? And this is going to be probably a wider set of stakeholders in the community than you would traditionally work with in research, or at least what you're going to ask of them is going to be more than what you would do in conventional research. So this requires an approach to trust building, early trust building, and spending time explaining what your intentions are, explaining what the process is, being clear about the security and ethical concerns, what they might gain from working in the process, what they won't get, what resources will or won't be involved, providing that kind of training and capacity building. These are things that take time. It's not a fast research process. The time commitment tends to be longer. It's hard to do a full participatory action research process in 6 months. I have tried, but you have to find, it doesn't allow you as much time as you would like to develop trust and scale the number of participants involved. With respect to methodological capacity, I mean, this is training in the methodology, but also in some of these soft skills of researchers. So as a researcher yourself, you need to have reflexivity and self-awareness enough to say, do I actually know how to facilitate in a way that can enable a whole group of researchers to have a dialogue about data and findings? Am I able to mentor others to do that? Am I able to withhold my own personal views about the situation that we're researching so that others can contribute their own perspectives so that I can maximize the agency of others rather than take that space myself by trying to impose my view on things? Will I be able to, if I'm not doing it, will I be able to train others that are going to be able to do that? These are the questions of power and hierarchy, and having the self-awareness to see how that hierarchy comes through not just our expertise and training as researchers, but also our culture. How have we been raised in the Myanmar system? How do we see people of different identities, how do we lift up others that are less privileged than us? These are all critical intersections with the research methodology. The ethics and security I've mentioned, and I think will be a subject of further lectures for you. Now, institutional infrastructure, what I'm referring to here is how much time is afforded to you to do a participatory process. It takes longer to achieve than other types of research. If you're just doing a survey that you design yourself and you send out and you get the data back, relatively easy and simple. If you're involving dozens, hundreds, or thousands of people, it takes longer. The impact from a application of knowledge and actually solving issues perspective is non-linear. So it takes time to develop the trust and relationships, to organize the people, get them confident and understanding the issues and taking action. And then they scale up participation and it has a lot of impact, but that takes a lot of time. And from an institutional perspective, sometimes you don't have an institutional backing that really has the trust in you, that you and your research team can deliver upon that. There's uncertainty involved. So from a resource or a donor perspective, or just your own organization, to say, look, we're researching natural resource management in this newly liberated area, but we actually don't know what we're going to do about it yet. We don't know what the exact research questions are because we haven't involved the community yet. Sometimes institutions struggle to handle that uncertainty. They want to know more clearly what your plan is and when you're going to deliver certain milestones. So having the right kind of institutional support matters. It's also important that we're clear about the limitations of the research approach. I've spoken to a lot of the benefits with respect to being able to actually implement solutions to the problems that we identify, for example, and challenging some of the unjust power relations. But there are limitations also. So this is not an approach to producing knowledge that is necessarily replicable. So you're not proving something about the nature of a problem necessarily that you can then generalize to another context and say, well, we've actually figured out how to do natural resource management in all the newly liberated areas of Myanmar because they've done affection research here. The idea is that there will be a different set of conditions, potential biases, different actors in other parts of the country, and the needs there might be quite different. Also, because of how participatory this is, we're introducing a range of potential biases in the research, which for that reason, it can be critiqued from a traditional perspective as not being a source of objective truth. However, that's something that we could debate for a long time. So as we draw towards the close of this lecture, I just want to conclude by emphasizing the key features of this approach to doing research. If you remember nothing else, remember these things. And please do read the lecture because the reading, because it goes into a lot more detail if you're interested about the building blocks, things that you would need to consider if you were going to do this as part of your project. But I will emphasize that this participatory action research is different than conventional approaches in that it is really emphasizing taking collective action towards shared goals. This is about challenging injustice. This is about changing social systems. This is about people from affected contexts solving problems for themselves. This is about learning by doing, not just research for the sake of knowledge. It's really about flipping the traditional paradigm or challenging the traditional approach in which there are experts that are outsiders that are often in some way different from the people that experience the problems. this is about maximizing the agency of the people that are actually directly affected by the issues that we're trying to solve. It's an alternative epistemology in any ways, which is actively seeking to challenge and transform unjust power relations, and it will challenge you and those that you work with to develop a set of abilities around facilitation, mentoring, comfort with uncertainty that are distinct from what we might have learned previously. It's my pleasure to be able to present this lecture for you today. It's a very brief introduction to participatory action research. It is an endeavor that I would like to be doing more of again in Myanmar, and I'm currently seeking funding and conversation with a range of organizations to initiate again inside the country. If you're interested in being involved in participatory action research in an ongoing way, if you have any questions about what we've talked about, please do write me an email. My email address is there on the screen. I'll be more than happy to talk to you about this. It's a real privilege for me to be able to present this to you, even though I haven't met you yet. I think that I will. I have long felt that the work that you're doing inside the country is the most important thing that I can imagine, and it's just a privilege for me to, in some way, be in solidarity with you with all the challenges that you've experienced in the last few years. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to meeting you in person.